Also, interestingly, Menger talks about what he calls true competition. It's not a matter of numbers to Menger. Menger says that, for example, if you have two rivals, we call it in economics a duopoly. Okay, you have only two sellers in the market. Whether they're two or they're many, all of them face a downward sloping demand curve. Okay, and if it's elastic above the competitive price, then they're not going to try to, whether it's two or 1,000 sellers. If the two sellers find that people will cut back a great deal in their purchases in response to a higher price, they'll act just like 1,000 competitors would. They bring the same quantity to market as would 1,000 smaller competitors. Okay. He also distinguishes between monopoly as an actual condition and social restriction on free competition. So monopoly as an actual condition, he finds no problem with. In the former case, an increase in demand will always call forth more competitors. So he gives an example. Let's see. He says, yeah, for example, if you have very few people that initially demand computers when they first come out, and you have one seller of computers, but there's no barriers to entry, when the demand for computers increases, you get more and more firms entering the market, which is what happened. Or when hand calculators, Texas Instruments was the first one to market these electronic hand calculators. They charge, the prices were $200. As demand increased, more people entered the market, more other companies entered the market, and we had an additional competition. So that's not harmful monopoly in any sense. Okay. The other one, the restriction on free competition, he gives the example of the Dutch East India Company and medieval guilds. Okay. The Dutch East India Company was the only company that was permitted to import goods from the Far East into the Netherlands. Okay. Just as the British East India Company was given a monopoly on importing goods from the Far East into Great Britain. So in that case, even if demand goes up and price and profits go up, you cannot have entry is not permitted. An expansion of supply by competitors is not permitted. Okay, so that's very, very Rothbardian to distinguish between monopoly as an actual condition, which is beneficial to consumers. Okay, because you only need one if there's very few consumers demanding the good. You may only need one producer. But as demand increases, additional producers come in. Okay, okay, so that's the basis of monopoly price theory. Okay, it's based on Menger's analysis. Now, most Austrian economists, Feder, Davenport, Wicksteed, the people we spoke about yesterday and today, also believed in monopoly price theory. Okay. In Mengerian monopoly price theory. John Bates Clark also. The person before Mises, though, that developed it the furthest was a student of Frank Feder, who was a follower of the Austrians in the United States. His name was Vernon Mund. He's been very neglected. Okay. There were two famous books on monopoly published in 1933. Okay, and these books were the books that diverted monopoly theory away from its correct development. One was by Joan Robinson, the British economist, The Theory of Imperfect Competition, and one by Edward Chamberlain, the Harvard economist, okay, in which he introduced the concept of monopolistic competition. Basically, in both cases, if you didn't have a million tiny sellers in any given market, you had a monopoly, okay? So if the market didn't resemble the wheat market, in which you have hundreds of thousands of farmers competing on a worldwide market in which demand curves are supposedly horizontal. That is, any seller can sell as much as he or she wishes without lowering their price. If you didn't have that situation, which never exists in the real world, even in the wheat market, if you are a seller and you increase your output enough, you can push the price down slightly. But anyway, if you didn't have that situation, then you had a downward sloping demand curve, meaning that you could raise your price. For example, let's say there's Budweiser. There are many, many competing brands of beer. But the fact that Budweiser can increase its price and still retain some of its customers, let's say it raises its price by 10%, this is monopolistic. This is an example of monopoly power, according to these two books. Okay? But there was a third book that came out in 1933 that was very neglected, was completely neglected. This was the book by Vernon Mund. It was called Monopoly, A History and Theory by Vernon Mund. And it's very interesting what he writes in the book. Okay? He has this quote at the beginning of the book, and it says the following. It says, Menger's logical analysis of monopoly trade was an original piece of work. Theretofore, economists had always made a distinction between the fundamental nature of monopoly price and competition price. Menger found, however, that all prices are determined by subjective valuation, and that the effect of competition is only to call forth a different supply or a different set of prices. This new and unified analysis of monopoly and competition made Menger's work a signal contribution to economic theory. So he recognized and based his development of monopoly theory on Menger. He points out right at the beginning that Mund does, that monopoly is exclusively an exchange phenomenon. Okay, it doesn't depend on the structure of costs, on technical factors, which we find in both in Joan Robinson's book and Chamberlain's book. It depends on someone having complete control over supply and being able to set either the price or the quantity. He makes the following statement. He says, it is in the act of exchange that the phenomenon of monopoly makes its presence felt. In an economic sense, monopoly does not exist until competition is restrained among actual traders. A significant thing about monopoly is that it has meaning only when considered with regard to the marketplace, the center of economic activity. It has nothing to do with production conditions and the shapes of cost curves and all this other nonsense that we see in our microeconomic textbooks. It simply has to do with market conditions. Therefore, the logic of Mund's approach led him to deny that, strictly speaking, an enterprise, that is a firm, as a producer, could be characterized as a monopoly. Because a monopoly describes a specific state of supply and demand. That is, a state that results in the emergence of a monopoly price. So that's why Austrians talk only in terms of monopoly price. Okay? That directs your attention to supply and demand. Whereas neoclassical economists talk in terms of a monopoly, a firm as a monopolist, okay, or in terms of imperfect competition or monopolistic competition, okay. And they talk about various technical aspects, but that's not what Mund did. He very interestingly he anticipated Kerzner and defined competition as a state of rivalship, okay. Today we say that in the Austrian terms, competition isn't perfect competition, it's what we call rivalrous competition. So Mund used the term a state of rivalship, meaning actual real-world firms trying to outdo each other by either selling at lower prices or better quality or new products. And for Mund, the presence of two or more persons offering to buy or to sell goods of a similar type, each endeavoring to outvie the other as to price or as to quality and price, and each acting with no outside restraint. So as long as there's at least two people in the market, okay, you don't need a million, you don't need all these teeny firms, you just need at least two people that are acting independently of one another and trying to better serve consumers. And then you have competition, and that's profoundly Austrian insight. In fact, he rejected Chamberlain's claim, the father of monopolistic competition, that competition required a large number of buyers and sellers. And he argued that it, quote, misinterprets the working of economic processes. Okay? According to Mund, whether sellers are 40 or 2 in number, competition among them will result in a market price being formed somewhere between the limits set by the valuation of the first excluded seller, okay, as I showed with Menger, and that of the first excluded buyer. Okay. Even a non-collusive duopoly, that is two different firms, let's say Coke and Pepsi. Let's say there were no other soft drink firms in the country. It's only Coke and Pepsi, and they're acting independently. They're going to be competing. And there's a great book written, The Cola Wars. So I think it's written by the then CEO of Pepsi, about and that's back in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, when Coke and Pepsi really dominated the soft drink market. And it shows how bitter and how vigorous competition was between these two firms. Okay. Of course, neoclassical economists would call them, oligopolists, and they start talking about how they would tacitly, wink at each other and raise the price somehow. And none of that is in Munn, none of that's in Menger. None of that is in Austrian economics. He points out that even if one butcher shop controlled 3/4 of the trade in a town, he said that would not be ipso facto monopoly. Okay, he says true rivalship requires only a market opportunity for two or more sellers or buyers, and freedom, willingness, and capability on their part to compete. Also, it doesn't require equal efficiency. Some firms tend to be better than other firms. The National Football League here in the United States has driven out every other football league, despite the fact that in the 1970s we had the World Football League trying to compete with them. In the 1980s we had the United States Football League trying to compete with them. For a while the Canadian Football League expanded into the United States. That lasted 1 year. Okay. The NFL is more efficient, serves consumer wants for professional football entertainment more efficiently than any other potential competitor. There are no barriers to entry. Okay, and that's what counts, right? Also, we're told, and you're told in your microeconomics courses or in your industrial organization courses, that differentiation of product is monopolistic. The fact that let's say Pepsi goes on television, and back in the 80s, I remember they stressed that Pepsi was for active people, and they showed all these people, good-looking men and women with, having fun, out, on the beach and so on. And supposedly that's somehow monopolistic. It's manipulating consumer demands and so on. But not according to, and they're trying to differentiate their product from other types of soft drinks. Well, Mund also said that this is irrelevant, okay? Products are non-homogeneous because firms are trying to better serve consumer preferences. Okay? If you think about it, when you go for an interview, for your first job, if you haven't already, many of you have gone for interviews for a job, do you try to come in and be just like the last guy who was interviewed and just like the guy that's coming in? Do you want to be homogeneous or identical with these other people? No, all of us attempt to show our boss that we're the one that fits their needs the best. Okay, so in the labor market, even where you have thousands and thousands of accountants or thousands and thousands of lawyers, let's say in New York City, each one is different from the next in terms of experience, in terms of their poise, in terms of other abilities and other qualities, personal qualities. Okay. And in fact, Munn pointed out that there was a qualitative dimension to actual competition. Okay, it's not just price competition, but quality competition. Okay, and that's continually going on, as we see among the auto companies, for example. They're continually changing the types of automobiles to better suit consumer need.